Assistant Professor of Political Science, Stefan Brooks. You are in the Brown Room of the Sue Craven Stivers House for an episode of Lindsey Wilson Conversations. The way this works is you get to enjoy a beverage of your choice while discussing a topic of your choice. And the beverage you have selected is apple juice, and the subject you have selected is the War on Terror. You are teaching a class this fall semester at Lindsey Wilson College entitled The War on Terror. And I guess the beginning of the War on Terror was September 11th, 2001.
In some ways, it was the most dramatic attack against the United States. But if you look back, the United States had been attacked throughout the 1990s. There were the embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. There was the bombing of the USS Cole in 2000 in the Red Sea. There was the Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia in 1995, where several dozen U.S. Air Force personnel were killed. There was, of course, the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993. So September 11th brought dramatically home, unfortunately, in a way that none of those other attacks did, that there was an organized attempt to wage terror against the United States. But I think the War on Terror actually predates September 11th, 2001, but September 11th really brought home to the American people and to the American government this war that had actually been waged against the United States for over 10 years.
Who is the United States fighting in the War on Terror?
Well, primarily Al-Qaeda and their allies, which include the Taliban. The Taliban was a militant Islamic government that took control of Afghanistan in 1996 and gave sanctuary to Osama bin Laden. They espouse a very ultra-conservative interpretation of Islam, requiring men to wear beards, banning music, banning flying kites, a very extreme form of Islam that gelled very much with Al-Qaeda's and Osama bin Laden's interpretation. So those are the two main groups we're fighting, although Al-Qaeda has affiliates. For example, there's an Al-Qaeda affiliate group in Somalia right now. So, but it's essentially Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and their allies.
What has the War on Terror taught us about the U.S. military?
Well, I think the War on Terror has taught us that the United States military has come a long way from their frustrating experiences during the Vietnam War. The War on Terror is we're fighting groups that obviously would be considered an insurgent group. Their aim is to overthrow governments, but they do not have the firepower that the United States military, or frankly, the military of any country has. So they rely on sabotage, assassination, hit-and-run tactics. And the U.S. military has adapted, I would say, overall quite well to those tactics, considering the inability of the U.S. to understand that type of warfare during the Vietnam War. But there's still a significant amount of problems fighting an elusive enemy, an enemy that is very difficult to see, that is very difficult to engage in direct combat. And indeed, some of the disputes about American policy in Afghanistan right now center on how should the war in Afghanistan be fought. Should it be emphasizing more Army and Marine regular forces troops, or should it be more of a special forces operation?
What has the War on Terror taught us about the United States political system?
Well, I think it's been pretty resilient despite what happened on 9/11, and we can only guess at the number of terrorist plots that have been foiled by the United States government in cooperation with some of our allies. I mean, we know why there's the liquids and the gels restrictions, but I remember reading about reports that Al-Qaeda was trying to target nuclear reactors, bridges. So I can only speculate that there have been dozens, perhaps hundreds of operations. How concrete they were is irrelevant, but there were certainly been many attempts since 9/11 to try and inflict more damage on the U.S. And I think the system overall, I mean, survived reasonably well. There was the understandable shock of 9/11, the first time the U.S. had ever been attacked really since Pearl Harbor, and I think that forever, that ended our innocence, that two vast oceans basically would provide defense against the United States. Iraq seems to have turned around. Afghanistan is deteriorating. Ironically, as Iraq is improving, one of the reasons Afghanistan is deteriorating is because Iraq has improved. And so Al-Qaeda has shifted a lot of their attention from Iraq now to Afghanistan. Indeed, they don't even mention Iraq in their propaganda broadcasts, which tells me that they've essentially written it off. So part of the reason the war in Afghanistan is deteriorating, the security situation, the rise in U.S. casualties, is because Al-Qaeda is refocusing on Afghanistan. And indeed, there have been many reports that many terrorists have moved from Iraq to Afghanistan. There probably is some justification that we took our eye off Afghanistan in favor of Iraq. The Iraq war in some ways was a distraction. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't have gone into Iraq. That's a whole separate question. But so in addition to the fact that the United States has not been attacked again since 9/11, that constitutes a victory, I think. We have foiled many other terrorist plots. I think that also constitutes a victory. Success in Afghanistan, that's more elusive. Some are suggesting that nation building is not going to work. We cannot build a democratic society in Afghanistan. Unlike in Iraq, where there's hopeful signs that things are improving in Iraq. I mean, Iraq has a history of a national identity. Afghanistan does not. Iraq has had a history of a central government. Afghanistan does not. The dynamics are very different. Then the last thing to point out is Afghanistan borders Pakistan, which has nuclear weapons. If Afghanistan falls, that's going to cause tremendous instability for the Pakistan government.
Assistant Professor of Political Science, Stefan Brooks, thank you for joining us for Lindsey Wilson Conversations.
Thank you.